And from that moment, I knew that filming of some description and acting was really for me. It was just so much fun.
How has that been for you?
Well, that's a deep question, because there's so many different avenues, as you will appreciate. Over the last 15 months, you're quite right. And I do remember being on the floor in the house and really low, and I was sort of going, okay, if there is a God, or if there is a spirit, or if there is something, now's the time to show yourself, because I'm quite prepared at this low level that I've reached to go out and stand in front of a train and see who wins. But I couldn't do that. They're all full of propaganda and rubbish.
Absolutely.
And I think more and more people are realizing it, and they are now turning to alternative media. And if we look at the big picture, that the people like the WEF and the WHO who want to and they're sort of, they're not the main players, but they're the ones, the institutions, I suppose, the think tanks that have been given this agenda to filter through all the various governments of the world. The plan, of course, is to
stand up for freedom together, knowing that we will be free one day.
Hello, Richard Vobes. Thank you so much for joining me.
Well, thank you very much, Gary, for inviting me on your wonderful show.
Well, thank you very much. It's funny being you know, in the role reversal situation. You interviewed me a short while ago, and now we're doing it the other way around.
Yes,
fantastic.
Which is great for me, because I don't know what you're going to ask, so I can sit here not prepared.
Well, I thought I'd start off with where you grew up. What were your early influences? What led you into the work that you're in now?
Well, I grew up in Horsham in Sussex, on the edge of the town, which backed onto a farm, which we used to play on as kids when the farmer was there. He was an old chap. Used to play on that a lot, and every time he came in and out the old little lane, we would duck in the crop that we that we were mucking about in, and then he obviously died, and the farm was, I think, left to his son, who also ran a different farm. So and the farm, I think parts of it were being used, but the main house just fell into disrepair. So as nobody was there, again, we started to mucking about on that. And it was during that time I met a small group of filmmakers who were filming a stunt role. So they were making a demonstration role of stunts, including shooting guns and setting fire to barns and being at stunts rolling off roofs and things. And after they'd gone, we'd watched them film this. They'd left some of their cardboard boxes and mattresses, which they used to sort of pretend to be shot on the top of a barn and fall down onto the ground. And my friend and I, we set these things up, and being sort of like 12, 13-year-olds, we made a film with my dad's slide camera, you know, in old transparencies, and we sort of basically nicked their idea and did it again. And we were pretending to shoot each other and fall onto these things. And from that moment, I knew that filming of some description and acting was really for me. It was just so much fun. And of course, being in those times, in the sort of 70s then, that would have been, so free to do all that. And now reflecting on what life is like here, where we're so restricted in the things that we can do, and we're so fearful, particularly of children being able to romp free unless you happen to be in the countryside. It is amazing looking back just how free we were. So I think that early childhood experience and many others of that period has really sort of set me now, as I've reached 60, to reflect where we were and then look at the sort of strange things that's coming onto us now.
Well, yes, and I want to get onto some of that stuff shortly, particularly farming. I mean, you know, because this is essentially my my blog show is essentially about crop circles and UFOs and things that go against the grain is the topic.
Right.
And the reason I wanted to interview you is I've watched you go through this kind of transformation over the last 15 months or so, where you started to bring on different topics onto your show, from this sort of Englishman that was going out exploring, finding out what it means to be English, I think was your buzzword. Then I noticed that you interviewed Neil Oliver, or you asked the question, is Neil Oliver right? And this was following a period where you just decided to do some vlogs rather than do any heavy editing, just walk to the beach on your morning walk and so on. And it seems to me from watching those shows that you were getting through the ideas of what do I do? What direction do I take this show in? And then you made this question about Neil Oliver, and that seemed to get a big response. And then from there, I've been an avid viewer of your show with all the different people you've brought on and all the topics you've covered. And then, of course, we met in Glastonbury last year and had a good conversation. So I thought, okay, I want to come at this from a couple of different angles. Number one, how has it been for you going on this journey in the last 15 months? The things that you've learnt, the topics that you've learnt, and the worldview that you've sort of you've had to adjust your worldview into a new paradigm. How has that been for you?
Well, that's a deep question, because there's so many different avenues, as you will appreciate, over the last 15 months. You're quite right. From people who've come on from a lawful, legal perspective about the system, the administrative systems that we're in terms of governance and government and what that means, to the alternative health that we have, and how big pharma has effectively ring-fenced health and made us all believe that there is just this one type of solution to ill health and what ill health really is, to money creation and banks, to spiritual side of things and who we really are deep in ourselves. And then on to now where we are, where we're talking about food a lot, and the nonsense that's being pushed about having no farmers and therefore no food, and encouraging farmers to not farm. Yes. So yes, the journey has been a rapid learning experience. But the thing that comes, I suppose, the most important thing, that the lesson I learnt, and unfortunately I adopted this very early on, was to have an open mind. Right. Now, I wouldn't say that in the past I had an open mind. I was very clear-cut. I was very black and white. I would say, no, I believe this and I don't believe that. And unless that other is inked into black, I don't believe it. But I'm completely changed from that. Although I think some of those lessons that one learns all the way through life has actually been preparing me for this particular moment. And I think we are at a moment now where we're going to see a huge change in all sorts of things, all those things that I've spoken about. Great revelation, I think, is coming. Yes. And people are slowly, not fast enough for my liking, but slowly beginning to realise the great harm that has been played on them over the years. Yes.
It's that transformation, isn't it? That you talked about spiritual there, but I consider the transformation in worldview, from going from a sort of fixed position of how the world is and what you think the world is, you know, what we grew up to believe, to then having it all completely turned upside down, is a spiritual journey. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And I was confused at first when people kept saying this is a spiritual war or it's a spiritual journey, because there was part of me that was quite agnostic, I suppose. At the beginning, my experiences hadn't borne out that there was any powers out there to help. I lost an eye in 2010. It had been 4 years up until that point. And there were times when I was in, a lot of times actually, when I was in huge pain, and one particular time when I was quite suicidal because I really didn't think I could go on. And I do remember being on the floor in the house and really low, and I was sort of going, okay, if there is a God, or if there is a spirit, or if there is something, now's the time to show yourself, because I'm quite prepared at this low level that I've reached to go out and stand in front of a train and see who wins. I couldn't do that because I had 3 children, and I knew that it wouldn't be right. I mean, I couldn't do it, and I wouldn't have done it. And clearly I didn't do it. Some people wish probably that I had done it, but that's neither here nor there. But I never felt all those times in the past when I was sort of asking for either the universe or for the higher self or God or whatever it might be, anything to come to mind. I never felt it ever did. Now, looking back, I feel that I had to go through all these experiences to appreciate a lot of hardship and things, because if you don't experience certain things, you don't have that internal understanding of it. And assuming there was something there looking down, or whether it was myself looking at myself, or however we want to express it, it was like, yeah, but I know you're not going to kill yourself, so you need to do this and you'll be stronger for it. And actually I am. And it's really sad when you hear particularly young people who get down about, I mean, somebody sent me a thing about the council tax, and they were so wrapped up in the fear of that they took their own lives. And you think, but that's just a moment, a moment in time, a couple of years of worry and stuff, and you just don't know what's around the corner. And if in 2000 well, whenever it was, 2009 probably, when I was really at my lowest, before they took the eye out, if I had gone onto those train tracks and met the Victoria Express, I wouldn't have been able to do what I'm doing now. And people say that, that they're very grateful for some of the work that I'm doing on the channel, which I'm so thrilled. And I don't, I don't take the credit for anything. We're all part of the same system, I feel. So I couldn't have done that, and so not only am I glad I didn't, but I and my children are glad I didn't. I don't know where I'm going with all this now.
Well,
but
I'm certainly glad as well. And as you say, I'm pretty certain a lot of your viewers are as well, because you've really, in a short space of time, Richard, you've brought a lot of people in, haven't you? And you've come across in a way which, as you say, is not judgmental, it's not argumentative, it's just, I want to explore these areas. And then when you find out information which you feel is pertinent to other people, you've broadcast it or carried out one of your interviews. And I think there's a lot of people, including myself, that have found that very rewarding. Well,
I am very thrilled. I find it difficult when people throw praise on me for stuff which I actually enjoy doing. And it's, it's like, well, I know there's a certain amount of revenue that comes from doing the YouTube videos, which is keeping me going. But I'm not doing it for the money. I absolutely thoroughly enjoy, and I'm finding the learning experience so rewarding, and it's taken me on this journey. So when people say, they say 2 things. Either they say, thank you very much, it's been great what you're doing and keep it up. Or they say, which is lovely, and I find, I have trouble taking that praise. But the other thing they say is, oh, Richard, you are brave for highlighting some of the things. And I think, oh, don't say that, because I'm really not that brave. I just feel it's common sense a lot of the time to ask these questions and to get people to say the things that are interesting and to learn. And then in my monologues, I do sort of then question some of what authority is doing and say, hang on, is this such a good idea?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, the title of my podcast is Against the Grain, and that's why I thought, you were a great person to have on here that doesn't just talk about crop circles or UFOs or those sorts of things that go against the grain, but it's a whole gambit of things that go against the grain. And that's why I think people are saying you're brave, because you're bringing up topics like, for example, Andrew Bridgen and his campaign to inform us all about what the WEF and the WHO and all those people are doing, and the farmers. I watched a wonderful interview you did with Gareth Jones about farming, and what's currently going on with that. I think that's why people think you're brave, because they know these days that if you go against the grain, you know, you suddenly get some attention from some negative areas. Look at Julian Assange, who's tried to reveal some truths, and look at what's happening to journalism in general.
Well, journalism is, I mean, we are the journalists now.
Exactly.
And we may not be trained in the nuances of how to present it and we may not have the huge media outlets to reach the market as newspapers and television does, but they're all full of propaganda and rubbish.
Absolutely.
And I think more and more people are realizing it, and they are now turning to alternative media. And the great thing is, I think that because of I worried about this at first, but because of the huge number of people doing this, you don't always know whether somebody's telling you a lie or a truth or a half lie, or whether they really know what they're talking about. And sometimes I wonder if I know what I'm talking about. But people can now go, okay, the responsibility is down to me, the viewer, to listen to what somebody is saying and think, okay, I can take that, but let me do my own due diligence and check it out. Does it hold water?
Yes.
And I think that's what people do need to do, you know, instead of blindly accepting what the mainstream media does. My worry is with AI, with things like ChatGPT, is where you can no longer check the sources.
Yes.
So you ask AI something, and it may come up with accurate information. I'm not saying it doesn't. It's just, how do you know where it got its information from? Whereas if you've got books or you've got, what do they call them, research papers and things, you can see who the authors are. You can find out about those people and go, oh, yeah, they look legitimate or they sound legitimate. You can check it all out.
Yeah.
And you know, if people are relying on things like the AI to do their homework or to give them information, it dumbs people down because they're not having to work for themselves. And I think we all need to take a bit more responsibility for these things.
I agree with you. It's something I've been saying for many, many years. You know, people need to do their own research. Don't just rely on one person. It's the culture with mobile phones and social media has been good on the one hand, in that we can do these sorts of things that we're doing now. But on the other hand, it's made people a little bit lazy. It's made people not go to look up the papers that an academic might have produced and so on, hasn't it?
Yeah, no, definitely. And people don't know how to do that. I mean, that's the sad part, is people have forgotten how to do this, how to do any kind of research. Yeah. Because we're not taught in schools to think critically or to use common sense.
Yep. Well, I used to call it rare sense, and I still do, really, because it seems to be pretty scarce these days, doesn't it?
Yes, no, that's a good name for it. I like that. Rare sense.
Rare sense, yeah, it's not common anymore. Farming. I wanted to get onto the subject of farming because that's obviously connected to, you know, the crop circles and the context of what I would say the crop circles is about. I like to leave the issue of who makes crop circles to one side and say, since I've been visiting Wiltshire, which is obviously a farming community, I came from a city, I didn't know anything about farming, and my 27 years of bouncing around inside of crop circles, I've got to know some farmers, and I've started to understand the process of producing food and how attached to the land farmers indeed are. And it's something that you've covered in the last sort of 18 months or so, isn't it? This whole issue of getting back to the land, and recently you've been talking about getting some land of your own and growing some of your own food. I live in the fair city of Bristol, which I've been here a couple of years now, and it's a great city because it's got this rebellious sort of nature to it, with the graffiti and, you know, Banksy and those kinds of things. And I was just driving back from the supermarket earlier, and there's a huge billboard which is about allotments and protecting allotments and getting rid of the legislation for that. Wow. Which is really great, isn't it? They're trying to get some sort of corporate...
the message is coming out, yeah.
Exactly. You've now carried out some interviews, and recently you did something about the land army with regards to what happened during the war with, you know, the women going out in the fields. What's your take on the whole thing?
Well, if we look at the big picture, that the people like the WEF and the WHO who want to, and they're sort of, they're not the main players, but they're the ones, the institutions, I suppose, the think tanks that have been given this agenda to filter through all the various governments of the world. The plan, of course, is to take control of humanity. And one of those ways is controlling food, or the lack of food. And we all need food. We've seen over the last, well, since the war, really, the Second World War, I suppose one has to now sort of identify these wars because there's so many of the blooming things. Yeah, so since then, the last 90 years, we've seen farming change from small mixed farms, mostly, which were servicing towns and villages and taking the population of those towns and villages as labourers or part of those, or small sole traders or family-run businesses who would support the family and the towns, the butchers, the bakers, the candlestick makers, the blacksmiths, and so on. Into the farming has changed into sort of high-intensity industrial farming, and we've seen hedgerows being removed, fields, the old field systems, turn into larger fields, and monoculture take place. Now, in the very old days, fields were huge, and we didn't have hedgerows and things, and people always think that's what it's always been like. But we had the Enclosures Acts in the sort of 1700s, and people were pushed off the land, and landowners managed to sort of realise that by having these somewhat smaller fields and getting rid of the commoners, they could start to make more money, which is what they did. But the difference now is that, as I say, monoculture has been, instead of lots of different things happening on those big open fields that we had, the old strips as they used to be, we're seeing one crop, such as now they'll be having spring barley going in, and they're spraying, of course they have been spraying, and getting rid of wildlife. And this has pushed farmers into an area, they've been backed into a corner where they've had to invest on huge machinery to be able to bring this crop in, and all the agrochemicals to spray the stuff. The grain itself has been changed, not necessarily genetically modified, but bred in the old-fashioned way to have a bigger like with wheat, a bigger kernel, if that's the right term, so that you get more of the white stuff and less of the and that's not necessarily a good thing. And also the crop is smaller to the ground, so that it can be easily processed. And then, anyway, the end result is it gets processed into food, and most of the minerals and the vitamins and the things that we actually need as human beings is taken out of it. And some of it is put back artificially with synthetics, and also in order to give it shelf life and in order to allow it to be travelled across the globe, it's got all sorts of other suspect things which are not nutrients to us and are actually toxins if ingested in long for a lengthy period, and is not good for human health. So in a nutshell, I suppose in a very sort of nutshell-y way, I've sort of expressed what's been going on. Now, you asked, I can't remember
what's your take
what
on
you
it?
asked. What's my take on it is that that we're in a position now where we are so dependent on convenience foods that we've lost the ability, apart from people who have allotments and a few people who've lost, who know how to grow food, we've lost the ability, and we've lost, more importantly, our connection with food. One of the things I find very disturbing is the fact that people sit in front of screens, and I did it with my children, and I'm, put my hand up to this in the 90s. They watched the television, they had a bowl of something that was heated up in a microwave, bought from a supermarket, and they did this action not really knowing really what it was. It was fuel. That's all it was. It was just essential. You ate this fuel, which actually had no real integrity in it. And one of the great shames is we've lost that gathering the family around the table, sharing a common meal, enjoying it together, seeing how it was cooked, being part of the washing up and doing the chores as well, that whole thing. And people are talking about getting communities going, and I argue that you've got to get back to the family community first before you start thinking that other communities are going to work, because unless you can come together around the table at least once a day or once a week for the family roast, where you converse to one another like in the old-fashioned, you're never going to get a community off the ground, because these are the very basics of life,
absolutely,
of living. So I think that we're in a very perilous position, that we need to start taking back responsibility and move away from these wonderful, modern, glitzy, glamorous, exciting ways of living, and to get back to some wholesome, honourable ways of living that we had, because I think that's the backbone. You know, we can embrace modernisation. I have no problem when we're using it now.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's brilliant. But to throw the baby out with the bathwater, to not have that wholesome backbone of which life sits on, we become like jelly, and we're no longer able to stand up for ourselves.
I agree. I had this vision as you were talking about, you know, the modern sort of TV dinners. Put it in the microwave, you know, give it 6 minutes, give it a little stir, bung it back in again. You peel the plastic off, and so you're thinking about convenience, or people are thinking about convenience with regards to washing up and all of those chores that actually did bring people together. And then looking at, there was an episode of Hugh Fearnley-Whittingstall's show with his farm down at Riverside Cottage, and he funded it was some years ago, and he funded some people with some allotments. And at the end of the show, all of the community that he'd brought together were all down on the allotment. They had a big barbecue. The kids were running around the allotment. They were eating the food that they'd produced. And he looked at the camera just as the show ended and said, "This is heaven."
Absolutely. And the thing is, it's funny you should say that, because Julia and I, my partner Julia and I, before we got into this 15 months sitting under these lights interviewing people endlessly, were touring around in our van a bit. And we would go camping. And when you see people camping, I remember the first time we did, I mean, I used to go camping as a kid, but Julia and I, we pulled up at this campsite, and we were in our van, and we were just watching, and there were caravans, and there were tents, and there was a fire pit. Somebody had got that, and someone was coming over and said, "Oh, do you mind if I borrow this and do that?" And the kids are running around, and it was early evening, the sun was setting, and they had the downs as the background, the South Downs. And I said to Julia, I said, "We are now in a Neolithic hill fort, or an old Saxon type farmstead, in which the kids are running free. There's a fire going, people are interacting, there's no television, there's no mobile phones, there's conversation, there's real food being cooked. All right, some of it may have come from the local convenience store, but we're breaking bread with one another, and people are happy. And the weird thing is, people are taking time off from work and paying for this life to live, and you just think, this is moronic. It's reverse about face. This is how we should be living all the time. Now, some people, of course, are going to go, "Oh, but I couldn't do that," and all that, you know, not with British weather and all of that. And I'm not saying that you would do exactly that, but it's that philosophy, that experience of being together in a group, sharing and laughing and singing around the fire and enjoying it, making your own entertainment, instead of giving that to somebody else on a screen and watching other people enjoy their lives. And we just sit back as potatoes going, "Oh, I wish I could do that."
Absolutely, absolutely. And then lots of people do, don't they? Watch travel vlogs, and they sort of travel vicariously rather than get up and do it themselves. It's so bizarre. When my kids were growing up, I took them to Rainbow Circle camps. My introduction to the crop circles changed my worldview, obviously, in a lot of ways, and some of that was food. Straight away, I thought, hang on a minute, I found out about the food. I had massive amounts of trouble with my in-laws, you know, saying, "I don't want my children eating these sweets because they're full of all sorts of things." And I was considered a mad conspiracy theorist, obviously, you know, and so as we all are. So obviously these things have come true now, and people now know that these things are not good for us, but it was difficult back in the late 90s. And so I took them to Rainbow Circle camps where they could be outside. They had the seat that, you know, for several weeks out of the year, the night sky with the stars, which so many people don't see because they're stuck in front of their TVs under artificial lights. It's those simple things, isn't it, that really. And the other thing that I thought of when you were just saying that is, we lived in Bradford on Avon, which is an old farming community. Some years ago, my children went to school there, and I made a video for a local farm that had converted from being a sort of subsidised intensive farming, you know, place that was growing Belgian blue cows or bringing on Belgian blue cows, fast growing, you know, just for profit. And they decided enough's enough. Let's get back to community. It's called Hartley Farm. And they started to rear Gloucester Old Spot pigs, and they started to grow Aberdeen Angus, rear Aberdeen Angus cows, and grow all local veg and so on, and built kitchens and built a cafe. And now all the local community all go around there. And I said to my children, you know, if we had one of those that covered for, you know, around 1,000 houses, there were 1,000 houses that were involved in the community with one of those central sort of growing areas, and you had communal kitchens, then in the winter months in England, you would have that community without the fire part of it. You could all be in the kitchen eating your dinners together with local residents and having conversations and so on. It would be so simple to do.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I totally agree. We need to get much more of that because we don't know who our neighbours are.
We don't.
And we're living lives now in which we're all doing different things, and you go back, and I know people say, "Oh, Richard," but you always hark back to the old days. But you know, in a village or a small town, people were working collectively for the common thing. You may have your landowner who may have tenant farmers, and as I said before, people were providing services for the community, and the farmers were providing. You had the milk. Yeah. You know, the milkmaid going up there with the churns, and people were dipping in their big spoons to take their milk and things. But everybody knew each other's business.
Exactly.
And you would help, you know, old Mrs. Jones hasn't been out of her house for a while. Oh, dear, I better go round and make sure she's all right.
Exactly.
And we've lost that. We've become so isolated from our neighbour.
Yeah.
And this is a worry. But the one thing I would say about all of this, particularly now, because I think we are at a pivotal point, is I look back at this era that we've gone through from after the war, specifically because I know with my parents who were alive and they were during the war, yeah. and so I've shared stories with them, and of course I'm familiar with their stories and familiar with my upbringing, is it seems to me that this has been, the way I look at it, an interesting experiment, that we've tried this industrial farming business, we've tried this globalization business of having food come from the rest of the world, that we can have strawberries anytime we like. We've tried these systems where we put ourselves behind screens and we don't know our neighbours. We've experimented with what happens if you break up a community. Yeah. And I think what we're realising in that experiment, this huge, massive, empirical experiment, is it's not healthy.
It's seriously not healthy.
It's serious. And so, having learnt that lesson, let's not ever do this again. And now rebuild where we want. There's lots of things within that, from the technological point of view, which can help us. Absolutely. If you've got a farm, for example, yep. and you're trying to do it, having a drone is quite useful to go around and look down and see where problems yep. are. But you might not want to use that drone to be AI or motorized robots to farm that way in an industrial way. You may want to, you know, because I think people need to be connected to the soil because we are from the
Absolutely.
soil. So I think we can use technology. Yeah. We just have to be in command of that technology rather than it suddenly says, oh yeah, you just put this in one end and you get everything you ever want on the other end. You go, well, hang on, where's the people in between? So I think the experiment we've had to go through it.
Yes.
And we now know that we will never do that again.
Yeah, you know, there is that sort of yin yang thing of it, isn't there? We had to lose it in order to realise what we had, and so we're coming.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, when you mentioned there about the stars. I mean, if I walk outside my door in my town in Worthing, in my 2 up, 2 down terrace, there's street lights, and you look up when it's clear and they're not spraying the skies, of course.
Yes.
And you look up and you think, where are the stars?
Yeah.
Oh, I can just about see the moon. As you say, you need to get right out away from all that light pollution before you start to see stuff.
And it's incredible when you see it, isn't it?
Absolutely. Awe-inspiring.
When you just something else that just came to mind when you were talking then was this. My teacher said this years ago, that there's a conflict between our heads and our hearts. The logic has been inverted. We're working very much in the head with the world, isn't it? And that's where it's profit driven. It's about balance sheets, and people who are shareholders with corporations have led us down this road which seemed logical, but it becomes illogical. And then people these days, I hear them trying to justify this absence of logic because it doesn't consider us as human beings at all.
Yes.
I mean, I've heard some people recently talking about you know, the elites that are doing all of these things, that are taking over farming and looking at central bank digital currencies and looking to take care of themselves, they don't realise that they're sort of like a cancer, and that the cancer is going to wipe out the body, particularly if we go to war and so on with nuclear war. So it's this logic that's of the head that's gone down the wrong road, and it's not given enough consideration to what my teacher used to say of the heart, sort of bit new agey, bit woo woo, but the heart sort of intelligence, which wouldn't do that. It would consider what we're doing to ourselves and what we're doing to other people. And I think this transition, this realization that we've gone down the wrong road, and what will bring us back is the heart.
Absolutely. I mean, what is the point of everything if you're not enjoying it, or if you're not thriving?
Right.
And you're just there to make a profit for what purpose?
Right.
You know, when you see, I mean, it's very sad when you see people having to get up really early to sit on a train for 2 hours to go to a job under artificial light for something they don't really enjoy. And then they come back after a long time and they're so whacked they can't do anything. They sit in front of the screen watching vicariously, as you said, somebody else enjoying their lives. And then they go to bed knowing they've got to do it all over again. And they might have a Sunday off. And then there's a whole load of other chores and things that they've got to do and things. Yeah. And they haven't really enjoyed their lives. Yeah. And Dave Allen, I think, put it brilliantly, if those people who remember Dave Allen, the Irish comic. Yes. And he says, and I'm going to say this really badly, but I'll do my best. He says, you know, we get up by the clock, we go to work by the clock, we come home by the clock, we catch a train by the clock, we do everything. And then after 40 years, we've done everything by the clock. And then when you retire, what do they give you? A flaming clock. And it's like, yeah, but it's very true. And Alan Watts says, and I've listened to a lot of Alan Watts' philosophy, and he says, you know, we're always being prepared for the next phase. Yes. So you go to school, and you're at infant school, you're prepared for primary school, and at primary school you're prepared for secondary school, and secondary school you're prepared for university, and the university you're prepared for work, and then at work you're prepared for all the sort of tiers of going up the greasy pole. Yeah. And then it's only when you get to the end and you've got your clock and you retire, but you're old and infirm and no longer able to do anything, are you allowed to do the things that you ever wanted to do? And it's like, yeah, all we've done is work for somebody else, given away all our energy, and we're not thriving now. And the whole of this 20th century, 21st century era has been designed in a way that we're not actually living, we're just existing. There's
this conundrum that's one of the things that's fascinated me with the crop circles is a notion of called squaring the circle, which they say symbolically is about uniting heaven and earth. Okay, if you make a square equal to the perimeter of a circle, the circumference of a circle equal to the perimeter of a square, then you're said to be uniting heaven and earth. And after years of trying to think, well, okay, that sounds lovely, but what does all that mean? I started to think about finding the life you want to live as squaring the circle. And you mentioned at the beginning of this interview that that when people throw praise on you for doing what you love to do, you feel guilty. That's the old kind of working class programming, isn't it? Because you don't want to you don't want to, you think you shouldn't enjoy or get paid for something that's, you know, that comes really easily. You think you have to toil and get your hands dirty, which is good, getting your hands dirty, don't get me wrong, but you know, like doing something. If you, Ken Robinson did a lecture about creativity years ago, and he said, if you interview lots and lots of people and say, you know, if you won the lottery tomorrow, would you give up your job? A large percentage of them would. But if you speak to an artist, a musician, or someone who loves what they do and say, could you give up? They say, no, it's who I am.
Yes. I mean, the money might just make life a little bit easier, but why would you give up if you're thriving? And that's the thing. Money isn't important. Where I am now, yes, I need a certain level of money, but it isn't much.
No.
And I enjoy what I'm doing, and in the next phase, hopefully, where I'm actually sort of getting in back onto the land, have some. The money would be good to buy the land, but it's not. It's not about buying fast cars or big tractors or, you know, whatever it is. It's actually understanding. I mean, understanding yourself and what you enjoy, and having people around you, and all those things that we've spoken about. The things that really intrinsically are free.
Yes.
That we forget are the most important things, and we think that sparkly trinket over there that we save up for and buy, well, these days you don't have to save up for, because you can get a nice loan and be in debt.
Absolutely.
And then as soon as you've got it, they kind of tricked you, because there's an upgrade, and you go, oh yeah, I don't really want this now, I actually want that one. And you're down this ridiculous route, whereas, as you say, you can go outside and stand up and look at the stars. You can pick a fresh apple off a tree and eat that, or a berry. You know, I used to do blackberry picking with my mum and dad, and we would go off, and that was just so fun. And we would do it on the you know, it wasn't like you were stealing anything, because they were just on the walkways and nobody cared. You came up and the brambles were there and you'd pick the blackberries, and we had a lot of fun. And who does that these days?
There are some people, it's very few. Yeah, absolutely. I always go out and pick out the nettle heads at spring to make nettle soup, and when people watch me and think I'm absolutely bonkers over the local park picking nettles, but that's the way it is. I
think there is a growing consensus now of the things that we're talking about. People are beginning to realise that actually the world that we have been living has been manipulated to a large extent, but also just very unsatisfactory as a way to live. And there are people who are organising change initiatives. Community has been heavily focused, and those simple things like food, growing nutritional food, moving away from pharmaceuticals. I think the great harm of 2020, and then the rollout of the so-called answer for 2020 has woken a lot of people up to, actually, is medicine, as we've conceived it in the past via the pharmaceutical companies and the doctors, really as beneficial as it says? And I think a lot of people are drawing the conclusion that there are much healthier options. And weirdly, and again, if this sort of 100-year experiment keeps coming back, because you think of Tesla, Nikola Tesla, and a number of what's his name, Rife, with their sort of inventions and understandings, the light machine. There was a lot of information. We were going in a direction that was going to be really helpful. Then all of a sudden, it got hijacked, and little white pills in bottles was the answer to everything. And these other technologies and these other ways of doing things have been sort of occulted and hidden and not talked about. And same with energy. We were getting to the point where we were understanding what free energy was, that we wouldn't be reliant on energy giants who had the monopoly to control the price and how much we have and cut us off and all those sort of things. And so we were at that stage where that lost 100 years, I think, is now we're picking up where we left off 100 years ago, where bioresonance is something, and the Rife machines and the energy potential. And I'm not talking about solar and wind.
No, exactly.
But we're talking about other things. And And so people are moving around, and I think we've been jolted into this thanks to, in a way, something that we weren't supposed to be jolted into, with this rollout of medical intervention, which is still a worry for a lot of people. So. It's a huge worry of what they've actually put into people's bodies. And then the connection with these 5G towers and radiation and stuff, which we know so little about the long-term effects of, and yet has been rolled out massively in the last 30-odd years with mobile phones. And we know that it's not good for us. And yet the logic that you were talking about of how we can be contacted and we can send all this information and all of that, and the digital world is so logically so useful. Yeah. But not if you've got a radiated brain and can't think for yourself. It's not going to be of any use at all.
Exactly.
So, yeah, people are, there's a whole gamut of people who are working hard to bring around new communities, looking at a whole host of different things, which are all interrelated.
Yeah. It's interesting you say about the 100 years, because that's really it, isn't it? I mean, 100 years ago is when Edward Bernays, a famous PR man, changed what was propaganda into public relations, and the public relations industry that's kind of sold us all of these ideas that we can be better. And there wasn't any fashion before then. Everybody just wore the same sorts of clothes, and then they started to offer choices and light bulbs and so on. That, there was a wonderful documentary made some years ago about the 100-year-old light bulb in a fire station in America. And then you can go back and look at the plans from GEC saying, well, we need to make these last a lot less longer so that we can start selling them. And planned obsolescence and perceived obsolescence by the 1950s was openly being talked about in design magazines. How long can we make these shoes last so that, they run out and we can sell them again, but that we can maintain brand loyalty so that people think they had a good deal. And these sorts of things have been wired into us now over the last 100 years, so that the things that we're talking about do seem so radical to people's mindsets because of the mindset they've been fed. It's not good, is it, really?
It isn't. I read a lot of old books, and I'm reading at the moment A.G. Street, who talks about farming and the agricultural labourers of the time. And it's interesting you talk about all this new stuff, because back in the sort of 1920s, before this 100 years sort of really got going, the farmers and the labourers were not worried about profit particularly. Obviously they needed to have enough money to get by, but they weren't concerned with all the trinkets of modern day living. They were very honourable to the land. The land, they understood, was the most important thing. And they had this view that they were custodians of, it wasn't the short term about anything. It was all very long term gain. Yes, not long term gain, long term
thinking.
Although there was a lot of immediate thinking, so they weren't necessarily thinking, oh, will we be in profit in 5 years' time? They were thinking, we've got this field of wheat, is it going to be up? And we're going to do everything we can to make sure it is. And then they'll celebrate and they'll enjoy it. And I think in many ways we've taken the joy out of life because we don't seem to enjoy what we've got. We have all this amazing stuff, but we just take it in our stride. Oh, it's a new phone. Yeah, what does it do? Oh, it's not as good as the last one. Or they've changed the menu in there. Here's, instead of going, wow, this is a technology that enables me to do so many amazing things. But now the amazing things that we could do with this technology, we don't. We're sending pictures, selfies in ridiculous situations, and
the cat flushing the toilet.
Or a cucumber surprising, and it is kind of amusing.
Sure.
But some of the basic technologies, what we're using here, two people talking, having a conversation, which might have appeared on the wireless in the old days, which you don't have to watch.
No.
You can set your phone up or your computer, however you listen, or download it as an MP3, and just listen whilst you're doing something else. And I think conversations on this technology is fantastic because you learn so much, other people's ideas. You go, oh God, not that Vobes. He's not spouting that bloody philosophy again, is he? But you hear different things. But some of those things that are just, we've become so obsessed with what would you call it?
Trinkets and baubles and sparklies.
Yes, but in terms of the content, it's just, people are just scrolling, watching inane rubbish.
Yeah, TikTok videos.
It's just it's so inane, and their absorption and attention is on that they have no broader picture of other things. I'm not saying they've got to listen to the news and know what's going on in the Middle East or in Ukraine or big issues like that. In fact, I think they don't need to know any of that rubbish, because it's not but it would be much better to be knowing what's happening in your local area.
Absolutely.
And your neighbours down the street, and where your farm shop is,
right.
and what good food is available, and those sort of things. But we kind of go, but we can just get it from the supermarket. And they have no notion about what's being sprayed on the food and how long it's been in the fridge before it. I mean, I used to buy potatoes from the supermarket.
They lasted forever. The supermarket ones, no.
I was going to say, and you get the supermarket ones, and they're green within a day as they come out of the fridge.
We used to have sacks in the pantry that lasted forever.
Yes, I know.
What happened?
They came out of the ground, they were covered in mud, and they just lasted, didn't they?
This morning I went to, on Sunday mornings, I'm a big sauna fan. I think saunas are very good for us, the hot and cold thing. So there's a new sauna opened in the local, it's called Windmill Hill City Farm here in Bristol. There's a community growing project down the road, and they've got this small farm, which you've got animals, and you can take kids over to see the sheep and see the pigs and see the chickens and all that sort of stuff, and they built a sauna. And I went there this morning, and you book a session, it's for an hour, and you're with there's 8 of you in total, there's 7 others. I was the old fart, obviously, and the other people were sort of in their 20s, probably late 20s, and we all sparked up a conversation. We were all sitting there, and we all had a really lovely conversation between us. I've been doing this for years, because saunas could be a great place to have. We used to have a little philosophy club in a sauna I used to attend in Defiance. It was wonderful.
Blimey.
Well, it just turned into that, because the topics we used to talk about. Strangers would come in and go, this is the most interesting conversations I've ever heard in a sauna. Anyway, what lifted my heart as we left was that we sort of shook hands with people we'd never met before, and this young lad called, he's probably 25 or something, Henry, said, we're bringing back saunas because these are the third spaces. It used to be the pub that you went and had a conversation, but those are closing.
Right.
Saunas and places that are actually healthy for you. The young, I was heartened to see young people going, that we need these so that we can have these types of conversations and be out in nature and diving in a plunge pool and so on. So that lifted my heart this morning.
And I do think that no matter how much the powers that shouldn't be, who want to try and take humanity out of us, and they've done, a reasonable job, but we as human beings, some people have fallen for all of it, of course, but as soon as you light the little blue touch paper again and you engage them in the conversation, and as you say, well, God, I haven't had a conversation like this for years, suddenly you realise the things that really matter. And I think that the more we can expose people to those simple things where they go, do you know, I haven't had a good laugh.
Yeah.
I watch the television, it's all political and it's not very funny.
Yeah.
But you just get people out and they have a conversation, and people can be naturally funny, or they say things, or they embarrass themselves or whatever. And you all have a good laugh at each other. And you suddenly think, do you know, that was a really good time. Why are we not doing more of it?
And I think as people, what makes me optimistic for the future, because there's so much to make us pessimistic, isn't there? And people often think I'm a pessimist if I'm bringing up these things that the WEF are doing or whatever. But what makes me optimistic is, having worked for some companies in the past, what happens is that companies, as they grow, tend to go top heavy and distance themselves from the actual employees that are answering the phones and doing the things on the ground. And they make plans, and they all look lovely, how they were going to organise people on the ground, but in reality they don't work because something happens, or the phone doesn't work like it should do, or whatever. These people who've been doing their think tanks and trying to organise us into a world where it's all automated and we're living in 15-minute cities and so on, what I think is going to be the problem is, and the thorn in their plan is reality, and it's us just having conversations and realising things like we've just described. That's what makes me optimistic for the future, particularly when I see young people like this morning doing that.
And I am very optimistic, actually. I mean, again, you know, I've had people and they've told us everything, all the woes that are wrong, and the ways that our privacy has been taken from us, and our sovereignty has been taken, and all of that. And I think, well, actually, what's really happened is we've just had a mirror shown to us and go, is this the life we really want? And the more of these conversations and things that we have, or experiences where you go, actually, that very simple thing of going for a walk over the downs, which I haven't done for donkeys, or taking your children and they're laughing as they feed the ducks, or whatever it might be, and you suddenly go, these are the things that life is about. Not that getting up at the crack of dawn to answer 400 emails about some planned project, which is, you know, because all my life I've been pretty independent from corporations, and my background has been in juggling and unicycling and fire eating. I went to mime school and do all this sort of, you know, used to do all of that nonsense as an entertainer. And sometimes the entertainment I would be booked with other acts into corporate sales floors as a motivation. Weird. It
became
concept.
the thing, didn't it, for a while?
It was, it was like, oh yeah, we get these people in, and the interesting part was you would see these people working and having these very detailed meetings, and you'd listen into their conversation, and you'd think, this is really odd, because it's so artificial. You're spending your life talking about concepts and things that, you know, that the inner workings of a dot metrics printer or something, and how you might be able to sell more and streamline this. And I thought, wouldn't it be great just to go outside in the sun and kick a ball about and just have a laugh, rather than this weird sort of anti-human conversation? And of course, then I would go home and know that I haven't got the pressure of the hierarchy of these line managers and what have you telling me you've got to sell more, and you must read this manual on whatever, you know, a new policy on this, that and the other. Go, my policy is to entertain people and make them smile. That was it. That was as simple as that, and not upset, you know, trying not to upset people. And that was it, you know, and come home and cook something nice.
Fantastic. So, to end then on this optimistic note, how do you see this playing out over the next 24 months?
I think this year and next year, to expand it a little bit longer, is going to be amazing. I think we're going to have a bit of a bumpy ride as things become exposed. I think a lot of fraudulent activity is being exposed. I exposed something the other day on my channel about Companies House, and how companies have, or people have been registering as these fake companies and then being limited and then changing their name and trading and
long firm.
And this, and this has been going on for donkey's years. And a lot of politicians are, I was going to say unfortunately for them, are tied up in this, and this is going to be exposed. The whole business with the medical intervention that we were talking about, that's all coming out. They can't keep that secret. So I think
on that, sorry to interrupt you, on that, Andrew Bridgen's just recently written this letter, hasn't he, to the Chief of Police. That's got to instigate something, hasn't it, surely?
I hope so. I mean, these powers are just sticking their head in the sand and going, nothing to see here, don't be ridiculous. It's, you know, you tell a lie, a big lie, enough times, people believe it so intrinsically that they cannot understand, even if someone is saying, look, here is the monster, there it is, and you're going, no, that's not the monster. It is, look, can't you see it's actually hitting you? No, it's not hitting me. No, it's just cutting your arm off now. No, it's really not cutting my arm. It's just, exactly. It is that Monty Python sketch, isn't it? But I think so. I think we're going to see a lot more of that cognitive dissonance happening. Yeah. But I don't think that's going to last for long, because the truth, you can't hide the truth. You can't hide the bodies. Yeah. And I think the people who've been operating this have either lost their timeline, or they've become greedy. Yeah. And they're moving too quickly, and we've started to see it. Whereas the very slowly catchy monkey approach has worked for so long, training us up through watching the television, being obedient slaves, not understanding what fiat currency really is, and all of this, and how money is created, etc., etc. But now we're beginning to see it. And the tool that they gave us, which I think they thought they would be able to control us with, and it is these sort of phone things in which we can do these conversations, has been their downfall, because people are stumbling across these by mistake and sitting there and beginning to actually use their noggin again and going, can that be right? Let me have a look somewhere else and see if anyone else. And I think so. I think optimistically, it's going to take a little bit of a while to reshape it. But I think if we have a general election, for example, this will be the last prime minister, whoever is voted in, that we'll see in the type of government that we will have, because I think that's gone. I think the royal family is deteriorating rapidly. And some of the big corporations. We are in the end of corporate Britain.
We are.
And they're holding on to it left, right and centre, and sending out their enforcement officers and all of that, and putting on the pressure. But I think ultimately people are beginning to realise they can step out of that corporation world.
Yes.
And when that happens, it's over for them. And I think the monster's head is dead. It's just the tentacles are still swaying around, and we're seeing fractions of it trying. And I think the more we have these conversations, some of those fractions who are doing stuff must be listening into these conversations thinking, oh, bugger. They're on to us.
They're on to us. Oh, Richard, thanks so much. This is exactly what I wanted to talk about. And to end on an optimistic note is perfect, because those young people that I was speaking to earlier, it was nice as well to hear them say that they listen to podcasts, and I listen to this podcast, and I listen to that. They're tuning in, aren't they, to this kind of alternative media, and as you say, that's
and they can't. The thing is, more of this is coming out. More people are opening up channels, and so those people who haven't believed stuff, and they're fed up with mainstream media, and our conversation is infiltrating all sorts, even if it's only in a small bits of conversation.
Exactly.
So people can't avoid it now.
Exactly. Richard Vobes, thank you very much for joining me.
Thank you, Gary, for inviting me on. It's been delightful.
Thank you so much.